Hello everyone, this is Amy from langleyclimate.today. Today, I have invited a professional about climate change to come to talk about climate impacts here in Vancouver. He is a co-director of the Environmental Engineering program at the University of British Columbia and an expert in climate change. Hello, Dr. Chintalapati. Hello, it is nice to be on this channel. Although I couldn't been interviewed in person, I have gave a detailed text response to put on this show. Amy will be reading them out in this video. Yes, indeed. I will put on my best professor accent. Now, let's dive straight into the first question. What are the symptoms of climate change that you have observed around Vancouver? An important thing to note is that it is difficult to attribute our day-to-day observations directly to climate change. This is why data is important to understand long-term trends. We know climate change is happening not because of single observable events, but because of carefully collected long-term data and through analysis by expert researchers who demonstrate scientific evidence of change in climate trends. In the Vancouver region, several trends are consistent with what climate science has projected. These include warmer average temperatures, more frequent and intense summer heat waves, and longer dry periods during the summer. At the same time, we are seeing more intense rainfall events in the fall and winter, which can increase the risk of flooding and landslides. Another important signal is reduced snowpack in nearby mountains and earlier snowmelt, which affects water availability later in the summer. We are also seeing impacts from wildfire smoke in recent years, even when fires occur far from the city. Is Vancouver one of the communities that will be impacted by climate change the most? What will change in the next few years for Vancouverites due to climate change? When we look across the world, or even to other parts of BC, we can see that there are other places that are extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Aridification is drastically impacting water resources in communities throughout sub-Saharan Africa. Close to home, Lytton, BC is highly vulnerable to climate change due to its location in a dry canyon, so it experiences extreme heat and wildfire events. It was almost completely destroyed by a wildfire in 2021, just one day after a Canadian record high temperature of almost 50 degrees Celsius. In comparison to these examples, Vancouver is less vulnerable to the effects of climate change. However, it does face meaningful risks due to its coastal region. In the coming years and decades, Vancouverites may experience more frequent summer heat events, increased wildfire smoke, heavier rainfall, and flooding events like we saw recently in Abbotsford, and gradual sea level rise. Those all sound pretty scary. So, what are some environmental engineering solutions to counteract the changes? Is geoengineering a solution? Environmental engineering focuses on both mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and climate resilience adaptation, preparing communities for impact. Some examples include designing more resilient stormwater management systems to handle intense rainfall periods, working with natural resource industries to reduce industrial emissions, improve and design clean energy systems, implementing green infrastructure and nature-based water management systems, and designing systems for CO2 capture, storage, or conversion to more useful products. Wow, that's really cool. But are these solutions sustainable? A fundamental part of environmental engineering design is something life cycle assessment, which analyzes potential solutions across their entire life stages, which include thinking about the sustainability of the origins of the materials needed to make the solution, through the sustainability of operating these solutions, and when they are finally ready to be replaced, thinking about sustainability of decommissioning and recycling the equipment used in the solution. By doing this right from the design stage, the goal is to avoid unintended harm to the environment and society and ensuring all aspects of the sustain are sustainable. In practice, true sustainability depends on how solutions are not just designed, but are implemented and maintained. For example, green infrastructure can provide long-term benefits, but only if it is properly designed for local conditions and supported by ongoing care. So achieving sustainable solutions often involves engineers work alongside communities, policymakers, and other disciplines to make informed decisions. I see. Well, what are some indigenous solutions to climate change? Indigenous knowledge systems offer important perspectives on sustainability and environmental stewardship. At UBC, a lot of work has gone into supporting the indigenization of the engineering curriculum. And we've integrated many of these principles throughout our environmental engineering program. We actually have ongoing partnerships with indigenous communities throughout our work in the organization called Community Circle. One of these current projects is working with indigenous communities in BC, but also the Arctic and Sub-Saharan Africa to develop solutions for climate-resilient water systems. These approaches are often rooted in long-term relationships with the land and emphasize balance, respect, and responsibility to future generations. Wow, these solutions all sound pretty great. So far, what is the biggest obstacle that is preventing these solutions to be put in place in Vancouver, or are they already in place? Many solutions are already being implemented in Vancouver and surrounding municipalities. For example, there have been investments in green infrastructure, climate adaptation planning, and emission reduction strategies. That being said, there are still challenges. These include the cost and time required to upgrade infrastructure, the need to coordinate across different levels of government, balancing competing priorities such as housing, transportation, healthcare, etc., not to mention the uncertainty in how climate impacts will evolve. Often the challenge is less about the lack of solutions and more around how they can be sustainably implemented and other competing priorities that the private and public sectors have to consider. I see. Well, what can we do as everyday citizens to do our part in stopping climate change? I think one of the most important things everyday citizens can do is staying informed using reputable, science-based sources. We are in a time where access to information is greater than ever, but that also means misinformation can spread easily. Being well-informed helps individuals make thoughtful decisions and engage more effectively in conversation about climate change. A well-informed society is also better positioned to participate in civic processes and advocate for meaningful climate policies. Policies and regulations play a critical role because they can influence industrial practices at a large scale and help enable more sustainable choices for individuals. It's also important to recognize that climate change is a systemic issue. While individual actions such as choices around transportation or consumption are valuable, their impact is greatest when supported by broader changes in infrastructure, policy, and technology. Addressing climate change ultimately requires action at multiple levels, from individual to institutions, working together to create lasting and meaningful change. Wow! So there's a lot that goes on into climate change, climate solution, and environmental engineering. Dr. Chintalapati, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, and you're welcome. And that is it for this month's climate impact video. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.